There's a document sitting in a museum in the Netherlands right now, an ancient Egyptian papyrus, yellowed and cracked at the edges, that describes rivers turning to blood, mass death across the land, and a people suddenly fleeing Egypt with the wealth of an empire in their hands. The Egyptians wrote it themselves. They didn't mean it as a confession, they meant it as a warning. And here's the thing nobody tells you. This document was not found inside a Bible. It was found inside an Egyptian archive. That changes everything about how we read the book of Exodus. Because the story you were told, whether in Sunday school or in a Hollywood film, is probably missing the most fascinating parts. Not the miracles, not the plagues, something older, stranger, and more human than any of that. So let's go back, way back, to a time before Moses even had a name.
Around 1800 BCE, something unusual was happening in the Nile Delta, the fertile, flat stretch of northern Egypt where the river fans out before it meets the sea. A group of Semitic people, what Egyptian records called Asiatics, had been quietly migrating into a region the Bible would later call Goshen. They didn't invade, they arrived gradually. Traders, laborers, families, settling into a city that archaeologists now know as Tel el-Daba, ancient Avaris. And over generations, they didn't just live there, they built it. Brick by brick, generation by generation, until it became one of the largest cities in the ancient world, the capital of an empire.
Austrian archaeologist Manfred Bitak has been excavating Tel el-Daba since 1966, and what he found there is genuinely jaw-dropping. The site, located in the area the Bible calls Goshen, thrived from around 1850 to 1550 BCE, spanning Egypt's Middle Kingdom, Second Intermediate Period, and early New Kingdom. But it's not the timeline that's striking, it's what they dug up. In the ancient soil of Goshen, beneath the ruins of Avaris, archaeologists unearthed a tantalizing mystery, a tomb of a Semitic man, marked by a shattered statue of a figure in a vibrant, multicolored coat, a garment echoing the biblical tale of Joseph. Unlike typical plundered graves, this tomb was eerily empty, its bones removed, defying the habits of ancient tomb raiders.
A tomb robbed of everything except its bones, and then the bones removed too? In the ancient world, that wasn't vandalism. That was intentional. Someone took that man's remains with them when they left. Now, we don't know for certain that's Joseph. Scholars are careful about that kind of claim. But the detail sits there, unresolved, like a splinter in your mind. What we do know is that the Hyksos, a group of Semitic people, ruled northern Egypt from the city of Avaris, and archaeological evidence shows that Semitic burial practices and architecture appear in the oldest parts of the site. Evidence of Semitic immigration beginning as early as Egypt's 12th dynasty. These people were not fringe nomads. At their peak, they ruled Egypt. And then something changed.
Around 1550 BCE, a new Egyptian pharaoh, Ahmose I, launched a war to take Egypt back. The Hyksos were expelled from Avaris. According to ancient Egyptian records, Pharaoh Ahmose I cast them out in a mass exodus that mirrors the biblical departure of the Israelites. After their expulsion, the Hyksos vanish from history, leaving behind only their ruined city and a lingering Egyptian resentment toward Asiatics. Now, here's where it gets complicated, and this is the part historians actually argue about, loudly in academic journals. Some scholars believe the Hyksos expulsion is the Exodus, that the biblical writers looked back at their ancestors' humiliating flight from Egypt and reframed it, not as an expulsion, but as a liberation. Not chased out, but chosen to leave. They argue the Exodus narrative perhaps evolved from vague memories of the Hyksos expulsion, adapted to encourage resistance to later domination.
But other scholars push back hard on that, because the biblical Exodus describes something that comes after a period of slavery, a people who were once powerful, then subjugated, then freed. And the archaeological record at Avaris actually supports that sequence too. After consolidating control over all Egypt,
Pharaoh Amosi initiated massive nationwide construction projects. At Avaris, he had a new palace constructed, the same location that would later be incorporated into an even larger city known as P-Ramesses, the very city mentioned in Exodus 1:1-4. In other words, the city where Semitic people once ruled became the city where their descendants built things for someone else. That's not mythology, that's archaeology. But the deeper question, the one no one can fully answer, is who exactly was the pharaoh that Moses stood in front of? And did that encounter actually happen?
Let's go back to that papyrus. It's called the Ipuwer papyrus, officially cataloged as Papyrus Leiden 1344 recto, and it's housed in the Dutch National Museum of Antiquities in Leiden, Netherlands. The document takes the form of a poetic lament attributed to an Egyptian scribe named Ipuwer, who recounts widespread disasters, environmental catastrophes, and societal collapse that befell ancient Egypt. The text describes rivers turning to blood, widespread famine, mass death, and social upheaval. The papyrus describes violent upheavals in Egypt, starvation, drought, the escape of slaves with the wealth of the Egyptians, and death throughout the land, written by an Egyptian, appearing to be an eyewitness account. Now, scholars are divided on what this papyrus actually proves. Some argue it's purely poetic, a literary lament with no direct historical link to Exodus. Critics caution against interpreting it as direct proof of Exodus events, noting it makes no explicit mention of Moses or the Israelites. Fair enough, but here's what is striking. The text also describes servants becoming masters, the wealthy losing everything, and gold and precious stones fastened on the necks of female slaves, aligning with the biblical account, where the Israelites departed with articles of silver, gold, and garments from the Egyptians. You can debate whether one document confirms the other, but you can't debate the fact that an Egyptian scribe, writing in his own language for his own people, described events that bear a remarkable resemblance to the catastrophe recorded in Exodus, including the departure of a people carrying Egypt's wealth. That's not nothing.
Here's where the story takes its most surprising turn yet. Modern science has actually attempted to explain the 10 plagues, and the explanation is more unnerving than the miracles themselves. From a historical standpoint, the first 9 plagues resemble natural events well known in the Middle East, save for their patterns and rapid succession, according to a 2008 study in the Yale Journal of Biology and Medicine. The theory goes like this. Climatologists suggest that a severe drought that upset the delicate ecological balance of the Nile River Delta could explain the first biblical plague, in which Moses turned Egypt's waterways to blood. The arid weather would have produced ideal conditions for microscopic burgundy blood algae to bloom in the Nile's slow-moving warm waters, killing fish populations and turning the river a blood-red color.
Dead fish would drive frogs out of the water. That's plague 2. The frogs die on land, their bodies breed lice and flies, plagues 3 and 4. Livestock pestilence and boils follow from the insects. Locusts consume what's left of the crops. Each plague feeds the next, like dominoes. And then there's the darkness. Some researchers have pointed to the eruption of Thera, the volcanic island now called Santorini in the Aegean Sea, as a possible trigger. Avaris suffered an abandonment event around the same time as the Thera eruption, which might be correlated with the departure of the Israelites. A volcanic eruption of that scale would have sent ash clouds across the eastern Mediterranean, blotting out the sun for days. Now, does any of this disprove the divine? That's not the question this video is trying to answer. But it does something arguably more interesting. It suggests that the events in Exodus, if they happened, were real enough to leave geological and biological fingerprints in the ancient world. A story that science keeps bumping into is a story worth taking seriously.
Here's what gets lost in all the archaeology debates and the plague science. The book of Exodus is not primarily a story about natural disasters or ancient geopolitics. It's a story about identity. Think about what Exodus actually does structurally. It takes a group of people with no name, no land, no army, no king,
people defined entirely by their captivity. And it gives them a law, a covenant, a purpose, and a God who speaks directly to them. Not to a pharaoh, not to a priest king, to them. In the ancient world, that was radical. Every other great civilization of the era, Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, organized itself around the idea that the divine communicated through rulers. The gods spoke to pharaohs, pharaohs spoke to people. That was the chain.
Exodus ruptures that chain entirely. Moses is not a king. He's a runaway, a man with a speech impediment, hiding in the desert, arguing with a burning bush about why he isn't the right choice for this job. As scholars have long noted, Exodus reflects multiple voices, historical contexts, and theological perspectives, assembled together to form a text that wrestles openly with questions of authority, identity, and divine purpose. And the Ten Commandments, arguably the most influential legal document in human history, are given not at a palace, not at a temple, but on a mountain, in a wilderness, to a people who have nothing.
That's the subversive heart of Exodus. Freedom is not the destination. The mountain is. The law is. The idea that a people could be accountable to something beyond a human ruler, that idea has echoed across 3,000 years of history, through every movement that has ever argued for human dignity, liberation, or rights. The abolitionists sang about it. The civil rights movement marched to it. Refugees across every century have whispered its words.
So, did the Exodus happen exactly as described? Archaeologists will keep arguing about that for generations. The Egyptian records are silent on Moses by name. The evidence is fragmentary, contested, and maddeningly incomplete. But here's what we do know. A Semitic people lived in Egypt's Nile Delta for centuries. They built its cities. They were subjugated. Their city was abandoned suddenly. An ancient Egyptian scribe wrote a lament describing catastrophe, fleeing slaves, and a world turned upside down. And the story those people told about who they were, where they came from, and what they owed each other, that story became the moral backbone of half the world's civilizations.
Whether you read Exodus as literal history, layered memory, theological poetry, or all three at once, the more honestly you look at it, the harder it is to dismiss. The museum in Leiden has the papyrus on display. You can go see it. The mountain is still there too.